Last year, a daughter of the Su family stole treasures and sent the master of the Yang family to be recommended, which made all the previous investment of the Su family in vain. Someone in the crowd came to a sudden realization. With this reminder, many people recalled such an incident. I also remember. But wasn't she driven out of the Su family? Why? Why are the daughters of the Su family all sneaky? It's really. Some women couldn't help but talk. Fang Yuan felt uncomfortable listening. He didn't believe that Su Li would do that kind of thing. Su Huanli shook his head helplessly and said loudly, "Everyone, be quiet. Please listen to my explanation. In fact, these are all family scandals, which should not be publicized. However, since Zipei has a bad character, I can't continue to hide it for her. In fact, it was Zipei who stole things last year. Later, she framed her second sister, which made me make a decision that I regretted very much." It was so. The crowd was in an uproar. The honest man was also caught off guard by Su Huanli's sudden self-explosion and didn't know what to say. Fang Yuan didn't say anything, but his mouth was slightly raised. "Master Su, I'm not meddlesome. This matter is related to your innocence. How can you know the truth but not report it? Instead, you cover up Su Zipei? What do you think of your other daughter by doing this?" Mr. Zhou accused loudly. Su Huanli was ashamed and said, Yes. Mr. Zhou is right. I have informed the housekeeper to let my second daughter come here. I think you will see her soon. How about asking you to taste her dishes at that time?" Mr. Zhou pondered for a moment and nodded. "It's okay. But the other 7 are busy people. I don't know if they can wait for a few more hours." "It doesn't matter. We also want to see what the real cooking genius of the Su family is like." The chefs who came to find trouble shook their heads and said, "By the way, he sure came over and said, I haven't asked the name of the second Mississippi, yes? The name of the third miss is Su Zipei. I think the name of the second miss is not bad, right?" Su Huanli was instantly dumbfounded. How could he say the name of Su area? "Head Su, why don't you speak?" Su Huanli's face turned red. When he was about to say Su area with difficulty, he heard a crisp and sweet voice like an oriole coming from the kitchen. "Su Li." Su Li calmly stepped into the lobby and gracefully saluted. "My name is Su Li. I am the Su of the Su family and the Li of the Lin Li. It's my honor to meet all the seniors of the kitchen school." Fang Yuan stared blankly at the woman in a white dress with a pure smile as before. His heart rippled. It turned out that her name was Su Li. Su Li only wore a very simple dress, which was not as luxurious as Su Zipei. But every inch of her face and every inch of her figure was perfect. She was like a lotus out of the water, showing a noble temperament out of thin air. She was like a pavilion in the moon, cold and untouchable. What virtue did Su Huanli accumulate in his last life? How could he have a fairy-like daughter? This thought came to everyone's mind at the same time. They completely forgot the scandal of the Su family and only saw Su Li's figure. Even those middle-aged women were jealous and never mentioned Su Zipei again. "I wonder if the 8 seniors would like to accompany me to cook a precious beggar's chicken?" Su Li asked with a smile. Mr. Zhou suddenly came to his sense and laughed to cover up his embarrassment. "Of course. Miss Su Li, please. Let's sit back." After he finished speaking, he returned to his seat. His figure was a little disheveled. "Daddy, I heard it from the housekeeper. Leave it to me," Su Li said softly and turned to instruct the helpers to prepare the ingredients again. Su Huanli saw that Su Li didn't blame him but only comforted him. He was so moved that he cried, "Arya, I am really wrong. If you can save the crisis, I will let you take care of the restaurant in the future." Su Li didn't show joy but said anxiously, "Daddy, what are you talking about? The restaurant belongs to the Su family. It's the same no matter who manages it. I hope you don't blame me for changing the name." "I don't blame you." Su Huanli wiped his tears and said, "If you didn't think of a nice name, I would make a fool of myself again. I believe that you can think of a better name if you have some time." Su Li squinted and smiled. Su Huanli quickly waved his hand and refused. "No way. Your name has been reported. How can you change it? You will be called Su Li in the future. It sounds much better than Su area." Mr. Zhou was overjoyed. "Thank you, Miss Su. I'll go back and wait for your good news." After seeing Miss Su Li today, I know that there is always someone better than me. The 7 of us are convinced. If there's a chance in the future, we hope to learn from Miss Sue. The 7 chefs came over and said with a smile. Suli hurriedly saluted. I dare not. Suli is young. I should ask you for advice. Ha ha ha. The 7 of them laughed heartily upon hearing such compliments. After exchanging some pleasantries, the disturbance in the restaurant completely subsided, and the chefs of the restaurant took their leave. The simple and honest man didn't say anything and left with a face of regret. In front of the absolute delicacies, no conspiracy or trick could bring down the byway building. In addition, there was a cooking genius who was as beautiful as a fairy. The task given by the county magistrate was a complete failure. The next day, the byway building reopened and the business was more prosperous. Many waiters found that there were many childs who came to the restaurant for dinner. These childs looked around when they came in and were absent-minded when they ordered dishes. It was obvious that they had ulterior motives. The shopkeeper smirked and took these childs to order all the signature dishes. When they were impatient, he explained, Childs, the miss of the owner of the restaurant usually studies at home and occasionally comes to the restaurant. Now the miss is not here. I'm afraid that you will be disappointed. Although those childs didn't like it, they pretended to be generous and said that it didn't matter and they would come again another day. The shopkeeper also took the opportunity to get a lot of benefits. He was so happy that he couldn't close his mouth all day long. Suli became busier. She practiced and read in the morning and cooked in the afternoon. She didn't have time to check the operation of the restaurant until the evening. But even so, she would personally check the accounts of the restaurant every day and then give them to Su Huanli. Su Huanli regretted that he impulsively handed over the management of the restaurant to Suli that day. But when he found that the business of the restaurant became better than before, he immediately felt lucky. In addition, Suli submitted the accounts every day, which made Su Huanli feel that everything was under control. With someone doing chores for him, he was much more relaxed and had more time to care about the operation of the silk store. By the way, because of the relationship between the restaurant, the cooperation of the 3 families became closer. In addition, some people deliberately flattered Suli because of her beauty. The silk store of the Su family also opened a new way, and the business was much better. After the business of the restaurant stabilized, Suli added the fried glutinous rice balls with sesame to the dishes of the restaurant. The price was still 300 copper coins. This move immediately won the praise of the people in the Desu town. I haven't eaten the fried glutinous rice balls with sesame for a long time. Miss Sue is really fast. I thought that the price of the fried glutinous rice balls with sesame would be higher. I didn't expect that the price was not increased. Miss Sue is really conscientious in doing business. Our Desu town is really blessed to have such a person as Miss Sue. The delicious food here is much more than that in other towns. For a time, there were voices of praise for Suli everywhere. Suli's fame and prestige both soared. If it was in the past, people in the Desu town did not know that there was such a person as Suli. But now, if someone said that he did not know Suli, he would be despised by others. The change before and after could be seen. After finishing this thing, Suli kept a low profile. She read and learned to read every day and tried not to show her face when she went out. Qi Xianqing, who had been observing in the dark, could not help but praise her. In many praises, she was neither arrogant nor impetuous and still lived like an ordinary person. Even those adults who had been through hardships in Jianghu might not be able to do that. But his little apprentice did it. He could die in peace to have such an excellent apprentice in his old age. Miss, the shopkeeper sent the accounts. One afternoon, Mammy Lee came in and shouted. Speaking of which, she was the one who had the most comfortable time of the month. Since the miss took over the restaurant, her status among the mammies also rose sharply. She had a tendency to surpass the personal mammy of the first madam. Now, those maids who used to roll their eyes when seeing her would all stop and respectfully call her Mammy Lee. Although she did not understand how such a big piece of meat of the restaurant came into the hands of the miss, it did not prevent her from being happy for the miss. Now, the first madam could no longer bully the miss. In the room, Suli stopped humming and put away the poisonous sound insect. Then she said, "Let him in." Hearing this, the flattering shopkeeper immediately put on a smile and went to Suli to present the account book. "Miss, this is the account of the restaurant today. Please have a look." Suli took it and turned it page by page. The study was extremely quiet. The shopkeeper did not know why he suddenly felt uneasy. Even the old master could not see it. "Second miss, could not see it?" "Shopkeeper Wu," Suli suddenly said. The shopkeeper was shocked and quickly replied, "I am here." Suli smiled gently and said, "Shopkeeper Wu, don't be nervous. Speaking of which, you have worked for our Su family for less than 3 months." "Miss, you are right." Shopkeeper Wu was relieved and said with a smile, "My former boss is Minister Li. The restaurant is very busy these days, and I have schoolwork. Shopkeeper, you have worked hard." Suli apologized. "I remember that your monthly salary is no more than 20 taels. I can give you 10 taels. What do you think?" Shopkeeper Wu was overjoyed and kowtowed again and again. "Thank you, Second Mississippi. Second Miss, you are really the reincarnation of Buddha." "Shopkeeper Wu, you don't have to do this. I have also made comments on the account book. You can send it to my father." Suli handed out the account book. Shopkeeper Wu quickly took it with both hands and left respectfully. After Shopkeeper Wu left, Mammy Li sighed. "Fortunately, Shopkeeper Wu is here. Otherwise, you will have a hard time." Suli nodded slightly, but her smile was inexplicably meaningful. Shopkeeper Wu retreated to the outside of the Jinyuan court, and the joy on his face gradually faded. "It's just 10 taels. Do you really think I will be grateful?" Shopkeeper Wu looked sullen. It was really shameful for him to bow to a teenage girl. After wandering in the Su house for a while, Shopkeeper Wu calmed himself down and put on a smile again. Then he hurried to the main courtyard. Suli tidied up the table and got up to inform Mammy Li. Then she took the carriage specially arranged by the Su house to the town as usual. The weather was slightly hot, and there were blooming rape flowers along the road. Suli lifted the curtain of the carriage and gently leaned on the back of the chair. There was a rare trace of tiredness in her black eyes. During this time, Zhu Yin and Su Zipei were completely quiet and well-behaved. Suli didn't know whether they were too shocked before or they had other plans. However, according to the old butler, Zhu Yin still went out from time to time. But no matter how they investigated, they couldn't find her whereabouts. Compared with the Zhu family, the foundation of the Su family is still too weak. Suli put one hand on the edge of the window, and her slender fingers gently tapped the window, making a dong-dong sound. Her eyes flickered, and no one knew what she was thinking. When they arrived at the Desu town, the carriage stopped at the back door of the Baiwei building. Suli calmly walked into the Baiwei building. When the helper who was adding firewood to the boiler saw her, he immediately stood up and wiped his face. Then he respectfully and loudly said, "Hello, Second Miss." "Hello, Second Miss." Along the way, every helper deliberately stopped to salute. Suli always responded with a faint smile. Those helpers immediately worked harder, as if they were injected with chicken blood. It was not simply because of her beauty. On the second day when Suli took charge of the Baiwei building, she not only immediately issued a month's salary, but also doubled the salary of all helpers. "Second Miss, you are here." He sure wiped his hands and came out of the kitchen. He shouted enthusiastically with respect and even reverence on his face. This month, he asked Suli for a lot of cooking skills. He found that every word Suli said seemed simple, but it could bring him infinite inspiration. She was a real master of cooking. Compared with her, his realm was really too low. Chapter 41. Uncle He, is everything okay? Suli looked at the front hall full of diners and turned back to ask. He sure laughed loudly. "Thanks to you. The business of the restaurant is good. I make much more money here than in the previous restaurant." "That's good. I have nothing else to do today. I heard that Feng Yuan has a younger sister. The place where they live is not peaceful. I see that there are a lot of vacant rooms for helpers in the restaurant, so I want to arrange a single room for them." He sure was surprised and happy. "I see. I think Feng Yuan wants to go home all day long. I thought he was lazy and slack off. Since you are so considerate for the helpers in the restaurant, you don't need to worry that the restaurant is not prosperous. Without further ado, I will find him." "Thank you. Uncle He. Su nodded and thanked him. After a while, he sure came with Fong Yuan, who was confused, with a smile on his face. Miss, I'm going to busy myself. The kitchen can't do without me. He sure said hello and left. Only Su Li and Fong Yuan were left at the door of the back hall. Fong Yuan stood silently and his heart was pounding. He sure didn't tell him the specific things, so he didn't know why Su Li wanted to find him. Seeing that Fong Yuan was nervous but pretended to be calm, Su Li smiled and said, Fong Yuan, I give you half a day off today. Lead the way. Holiday? Where to? Fong Yuan was confused. Of course, to your residence. Su Li took it for granted, which made Fong Yuan more confused. The relationship between him and Su Li was not close. To be precise, he had complex thoughts. He never thought that one day Su Li would take the initiative to find him. After 5 minutes, Fong Yuan led Su Li to walk on the road to the South Street, and the blush on his face had not faded. Sin, how could I have that idea? The salary Su Li gave him solved his urgent need. His sister didn't have to starve. He wanted to make more money to change his residence. He didn't expect that Su Li would take the initiative to help them. Fong Yuan, tell me, didn't I give you 500 taels before? Su Li asked curiously, why do you live in the South Street? Fong Yuan was ashamed and said honestly, I feel sorry for Mississippi. All the money was stolen before. That's why my sister and I can only stay here. We even troubled Miss to come to such a place. It's really... Don't call yourself a villain in front of me, Su Li said in a soft voice. I can see that your groveling is just a facade. Deep down, he should be a very proud person. He was just temporarily wronged for the sake of a better life. As for me, I don't like the feeling of being superior at all. How about we call each other friends? Fong Yuan was slightly shocked. Looking at Su Li's pure and transparent eyes, he was stunned for a while. She wants to be friends with me? Can a person like me really do it, ah? Suddenly, a scream pierced through the sunset. The scream was common in the South Street, but it made Fong Yuan change his face suddenly. He rushed to the direction of the scream like a madman. Little sister. Su Li narrowed her eyes and immediately followed him. Fong Yuan burst out his full strength in an instant. He crossed the street like a residual shadow, turned into an alley, and rushed into the mansion at the end. Boom! 2 heavy wooden doors were kicked open by Fong Yuan. A large group of ruffians with untidy clothes came into view. Fong Ling was lying in the middle of the ruffians. She had been stripped to her underwear. Brother! Fong Ling screamed hoarsely. She was so ashamed that she wanted to die. Her limbs were pressed, but she couldn't even cover her eyes. Fong Yuan's eyes were red. He looked at more than a dozen strong men in the courtyard and gnashed his teeth. You all deserve to die. Ha 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 ha. The head of the ruffians with a naked upper body suddenly laughed. He pointed at Fong Yuan and almost couldn't stand up straight. Brothers, did you hear that? This little boy even said that we all deserve to die. Several others suddenly became interested. They put down Fong Ling and slowly walked to Fong Yuan and surrounded him. The head of the ruffians looked at Fong Yuan, who was only as high as his shoulder. He sneered and bent down. He patted Fong Yuan's face with his palm and arrogantly said, Boy, I am here. You kill me. Do you dare to kill people? Have you ever killed people? It's so funny. Now even a little boy dares to climb on my head. Puff. The head of the ruffians widened his eyes and looked down at the dagger inserted in his heart. The cold and sharp pain spread all over his body in an instant. This boy really dared to kill people? You all have to die. Fong Yuan quickly pulled out the dagger and the blood splashed on his face. When other ruffians were still in a daze, he easily inserted the dagger into another man's heart. At this time, more than a dozen ruffians reacted and showed fear. They had never seen such a ruthless kid who killed people, but they were also ruffians who had seen blood. Stimulated by the blood, they didn't escape. Instead, they showed ferocity and drew out their broadswords and rushed over. The eldest brother and the 4th brother are dead. Revenge for them. He is only one person, and we have 16. Don't be afraid. Kill him. Fong Yuan looked cold, as if he had turned into a weapon without temperature. He shuttled in the crowd. His dagger was like a poisonous snake. Every time he waved it, it would cut the throat of a ruffian and take away a life. The smell of blood quickly spread in the courtyard. Clang! The knife and the dagger collided and made a crisp sound. The strong shock made the ruffian's mouth bleed, but he grinned grimly. "Brother, be careful." Fong Ling saw the shadow behind Fong Yuan and immediately screamed in horror. Fong Yuan screamed in his heart, but he had no time to dodge. He was hugged by the ruffian behind and couldn't move. The ruffian in front of him immediately chopped down. Puff! The knife went into his flesh. Under the severe pain, Fong Yuan's pupils contracted. He didn't know where he got the strength from. In the blink of an eye, he broke away from the arms of the ruffian behind him and got out from the crotch of the ruffian in front of him. At the same time, he threw the dagger in his hand and pierced the necks of two ruffians. Clang! Plop! The dagger fell to the ground. With the sound of the corpses, the courtyard returned to silence. Fong Yuan sat on the ground and gasped a few times with his hands on his shoulders. He didn't have time to bandage the wound. He limped to the front of his sister and took off his coat to cover her. Fong Ling stared at her brother in a daze. Her eyes were full of tears. After a while, she finally cried. "It's all right. Everything is all right." Fong Yuan held his sister tightly in his arms. His hands, which were covered with blood and had never been soft-hearted when killing people, were slightly trembling at this moment. If Su Li didn't come back with him— Yes, Su Li. Fong Yuan suddenly woke up. At this moment, there was a rustling sound of footsteps behind him. Fong Yuan's mouth was full of bitterness. He could hear the footsteps every day. He didn't need to look back to know who it was. Sure enough, how could a person like him become a friend with her? He was a devil whose hands were covered with blood. How could an ordinary and kind girl like Su Li accept it? They were not people of the same world at all. "Miss Su." Taking a deep breath, Fong Yuan said in a low voice, "Maybe you can't understand what I do. I won't hurt you. We won't appear in the Desu town in the future. If you want to report to the government, go ahead." After he said this, the footsteps stopped behind Fong Yuan and there was no response for a long time. Fong Yuan felt pain in his heart. What should Su Li's expression be now? Was she scared, frightened, or overwhelmed? He was so damned that she saw such a terrible scene. "Brother." Suddenly, Fong Ling's voice pulled Fong Yuan back to reality. Fong Ling raised her head and looked through Fong Yuan with a puzzled look. She said, "Brother, look. Sister Su is smiling." Fong Yuan looked back in amazement and saw Su Li squatting down with a gentle smile. Her spotless skirt was suddenly stained with mud. Her tone was as usual, even with a trace of coquettishness. "Little fool, these people deserve to die. How can I report to the government?" At this moment, Fong Yuan was stunned. No matter how rich his imagination was, he didn't expect that Su Li's reaction would be so unusual. It was simply against common sense. At this moment, he even misunderstood. Was the concept of women in the Dahan country different from that in the Nanjiang country? "You have a lot to ask, and I have a lot to ask." Su Li took off her cloak and tied it for Fong Ling. "At least you won't kill innocent people for your own selfish desires, right?" Fong Yuan nodded with a complicated look. He didn't expect that he would be relieved one day. Su Li lowered her head to deal with the wound, and her eyes were gloomy. His thoughts drifted away unconsciously. The execution ground of the previous life. It was 1:15 and the sun was shining. "Su Li, you damn devil. In order to practice the poisonous martial arts, you trapped and killed 200,000 soldiers of the Dahan country, which led to the victory of the enemy country and made the people homeless and homeless. The monstrous crimes you have committed are too numerous to be listed. Devil, you broke up my family. I can't wait to eat your flesh and drink your blood. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect that you would have such a day. God is fair. He must let you taste the pain and die." Chapter 42. When the lanterns were lit, Su Li returned to the inn with Fong Yuan and his sister. Shopkeeper Wu, who was anxious, immediately breathed a sigh of relief and greeted her. "Miss, you've finally come back. Why did it take you so long?" Shopkeeper Wu passed by Su Li and looked at Fong Yuan. He was a little gloomy and blamed, "Fong, how can you let Miss go to the South Street with you? If Miss is in danger, can you bear the responsibility?" Fong Yuan's expression was obscure and complicated, but he didn't say anything and looked at Suli. Suli waved her hand and said softly, "Shopkeeper Wu, you don't need to blame Fong Yuan. It's my fault. Fong Yuan's sister caught a cold, so I decided to take her to the Baichaotang. That's why she was delayed, but she didn't encounter any other danger." "I see." Shopkeeper Wu looked at Suli and immediately became gentle. He smiled and said, "Today I went to the old master. The old master also praised that Mrs. Account annotation was excellent. Miss, you are really a genius." Suli chuckled and didn't answer. After arranging the residence of Fong Yuan and his sister, she returned to the Su house by carriage. "Mammy, I feel a little tired today. You should also go to bed early." After dinner, Suli ordered Mammy Li. Mammy Li quickly agreed. She helped Suli take a bath and lie down. Then she left. When Mammy Li's breath completely disappeared, Suli sat up from the bed. Her eyes were clear. Today, she witnessed Fong Yuan's bloody battle and recalled the previous life. She had all kinds of insights in her heart. At this time, practicing would inevitably yield half the result with twice the effort. She rebuked Mammy Li in order to have enough time to digest what she had learned. In the early morning of the next day, the light of dawn shone into the room. Wisps of purple steam shrouded around the bed, like a fairyland. When the rooster crowed, the dense purple air immediately surged and submerged into Su Li's body like a whale sucking water. Su Li exhaled a turbid breath. Her eyelashes trembled slightly, and then she slowly opened her clear eyes. The air in front of her twisted for a moment, and then returned to calm. "I didn't expect that I have reached the acquired 9th hurdle in this life in less than half a year. I only need a little opportunity to reach the inborn realm." Su Li looked down at her white and slender hands with no joy or sorrow in her eyes. She still remembered that in her previous life, she had used up all of her potential due to improper cultivation and was stuck at Hotian Realm Level 8. In the end, she relied on the poison scripture and broke her own hands in exchange for Hotian Realm Level 9. However, she was discovered by the righteous and was hunted down. In this life, she was only 15 years old, but she had already practiced the 5th hurdle of Ghost Valley meditation direction and reached the level of Qi Xianqing. What a pity! She had accidentally obtained the method of making the extraordinary soil in her previous life. She only needed to sprinkle a little bit of the extraordinary soil along the way, and within 6 hours, no matter how much pressure she was under, she would recover to her original state in a short time. Moreover, it also had the effect of concealing her aura. After 6 hours, the extraordinary extreme soil would become ordinary soil, and no one would be able to detect any abnormalities. In her previous life, she had relied on the mysterious extreme earth to escape countless pursuits. In this life, he had naturally created some early on, just in case. After the morning class, Su Li returned to the Jinyuan court. The Su house was still quiet as usual. It seems that Su Huanli is not stupid to block the news. Su Li put down the writing brush and dried the ink on the envelope. Her calm face was a little cold. At this moment, in the warehouse of the back mountain, Su Huanli looked at the corner of the warehouse with only a few small bags of seasonings left. His face was extremely ugly. He punched the wall fiercely and roared in a low voice. "The warehouse of the Su family is extremely hidden. Who did it? With only a little seasoning left, the byway building can't last for 2 days." Lin also frowned tightly. Such an accident really caught him unprepared. "Master, the guards were all stunned by the sleeping incense and didn't know anything. And there is no trace of carriage driving outside the warehouse. It's so weird." Li Yin analyzed it sentence by sentence. Su Huanli immediately said angrily, "Can these seasonings fly away by themselves? Oldly, is there really no raw materials in the mountains near the Desu town?" Li Yin quickly bowed his head and said, "Master, after a month of searching, the mature period of this spice plant has already passed. All raw materials have been collected in the warehouse. Even if we find the mountains around other towns, There will be no raw materials at all. Bastard. It's really outrageous. Su Huanli trembled with anger. The time is too coincidental. There must be a mole in the Su family. Damn it. Without these raw materials, the beggar's chicken will be gone, and the reputation of the Baiwei building will plummet. It's really a good method. Who is against the Su family? The more Su Huanli said, the more he felt cold and desperate. The enemy's methods were far more than just brilliant. Their every move seemed to be seen by the other party, while they were still in the dark. They had no idea who the culprit was. After a moment of breathing, Su Huanli calmed down and whispered, "Don't make it public. Otherwise, it will be hard to explain to the Yang family and the Zhu family. You go to second, Li, and ask if other seasonings can be used instead. If not, let her develop new dishes immediately." Li Yin sighed when he heard the words. How could there be a new dish so easily? The Baiwei building might be finished. Thinking of this, Li Yin didn't say it and hurried to the Jinyuan court. Raw materials are stolen? Develop new dishes? In the study, Suli stood up in surprise and was shocked. Grandpa Butler, what happened? Have all those raw materials been stolen? Li Yin sighed and was about to explain, but he heard the shout of the guard outside. Butler, there is a letter on the gate. Come and have a look. Li Yin immediately looked serious and hurried to the gate. He took the envelope in the guard's hand and asked, "When did it happen?" "I just opened the door, and the letter fell from the crack of the door." The guard answered truthfully, which made Li Yin frown more. It was impossible to know the specific time. With a sigh, Li Yin unfolded the note and looked at it. His face changed slightly. Without saying anything, he took the note to Su Huanli. "I am lucky. I have hundreds of kilograms of raw materials for seasoning the beggar's chicken. If the Su family is interested in buying, they can go to the Sanha Bridge to trade at midnight. Each kilogram is priced at 800 taels. With the financial resources of the Su family, they can afford 10,000 taels of silver. Remember, if you come with your subordinates or officers and soldiers, I will disappear immediately. If you still want the Baiwei building, you can come to trade alone. I won't wait for you." Su Huanli read it with trembling hands and immediately tore the note into pieces angrily. "It's a naked blackmail. Hateful. Hateful." Li Yin shook his head helplessly. "Master, this person stole the seasoning and then sold it blatantly. Obviously, he knows that our Su family will never give up the beggar's chicken. 1 kilogram of raw materials can make 300 beggar's chickens. Including the precious beggar's chicken, the gross profit is only about 2,500 taels of silver. Our Su family accounts for 40%, which is only 1,000 taels of silver. This person asked for 800 taels, which is the bottom line. It's terrible." After listening to the score, Su Huanli suddenly broke into a cold sweat. When did their Su family provoke such a terrible enemy? He took away all the seasoning secretly and could thoroughly find out the bottom line of the Su family's profit. He was not a mole but a roundworm in the stomach of the Su family. However, this person still didn't take one thing into account. Li Yin whispered, "Master's false accounts were so vivid that the Zhu and Yang families didn't find anything unusual. In this way, our Su family can account for 60% of the profit. The Zhu and Yang families account for more than half of the loss of 800 taels. In fact, our loss is not much." Su Huanli looked a little better, but still looked terrible tonight. "You hide in the dark and go with me. If you can catch this person, I must peel off his skin." Li Yin was silent for a moment and finally nodded slightly. Su Huanli sighed and said helplessly, "Old Li, I know you are in a dilemma, but you also know that the Su family is not a martial arts family. In this dangerous situation, I can only rely on you. If you can help me catch the thief, you can take half of the property of the Su family." Li Yin was slightly shocked and quickly refused. "Master, you are too serious. I never want to seize the property of the Su family. I just want to live a retired life here peacefully." Su Huanli smiled and squinted. "Then I won't force you. You should be careful today." "Yes, master." In the afternoon, the weather was very good. The Baiwei building was still lively as usual, but Feng Yuan smelled an unusual atmosphere. It seemed that under the calm surface, the undercurrent was surging, and it was impossible to predict the future. How was she going to deal with those seasonings? Fang Yuan was puzzled, but he dared not go to the Su house to find Su Li for fear of exposing himself. In the blink of an eye, it was night. The moonlight covered the Sanha bridge like a veil, and the calm lake reflected a lonely figure. By the moonlight, Su Li saw herself in the lake. It was a man in his 30s with a black face and a beard. His face was extremely ordinary. He was tall and thin, but he was as thin as a bamboo pole. Anyone who saw him would never associate him with the most beautiful Miss Su in the Desu town. Fortunately, my cultivation has reached the acquired 9th hurdle. Otherwise, I am afraid that it will take me several days to recuperate after such stretching. When Su Li muttered in her heart, a figure finally appeared on the other side of the Sanha bridge. It was Su Huanli who came alone. When Su Huanli saw the man's face, his heart suddenly tightened. He had never seen this man before. Who the hell are you? What grievances do you have with the Su family? Why do you steal the goods of the Su family? Su Huanli asked 3 questions in a row. Su Li chuckled and said in a low and unpleasant voice, "Old guy, don't talk nonsense. Do you want the hundreds of kilograms of raw materials or not?" Then, Su Li turned her head to look under the bridge and said in a cold tone, "Old guy, I clearly let you come alone, but you have to bring someone with you. Is it not clear enough on the note I gave you?" Li Yin, who had just dived into the water, suddenly felt nervous. Was he discovered? Or was he bluffing? "You are talking nonsense." Su Huanli was guilty, but his face didn't change. "I came alone. Don't slander me." Ho ho ho. Chapter 44. Alas, Li Yin sighed and finally floated up from the lake. He flew to the bridge and cupped his hands. "I didn't expect to meet a fellow practitioner in Jianghu. I am not as good as you in cultivation. We admit defeat this time. But I'm curious. A senior in the acquired 9th hurdle can easily get 10,000 taels of silver. Why do you embarrass the Su family?" Su Li snorted coldly and did not answer. Li Yin's heart sank and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He walked to Su Huanli and sighed in a low voice, "Master, I'm sorry. I'm not his opponent." Su Huanli's face was extremely gloomy. "You haven't fought with each other. How can you know who is better?" He suspected that Li Yin was perfunctory. Li Yin's expression changed slightly and his voice became cold. "Master, do you want me to be seriously injured before you believe me? If I really fight with him, he might even kill old master as well." Su Huanli was finally frightened when he heard this. Before he came here, he never thought that his life would be in danger. In his mind, Li Yin was already a senior among seniors. In the past years, the Su family encountered all kinds of martial difficulties, but none of them could baffle Li Yin. "It's not easy for your Su family. I'll let you go." Su Li's eyes were like electricity, which made Su Huanli tremble slightly. 1,000 taels of raw materials for 1 gene. If you don't buy it, get out. 1,000 taels of raw materials for 1 gene. Su Huanli almost suffocated. The price was so horrible that it almost took out half of the profit of the beggar's chicken. But for the byway building, he had only one way to go. After a long time, Su Huanli said with difficulty, "I don't have so much liquidity. I only have 50,000 taels for the time being." "That's easy." Su Li threw out the raw materials prepared early. "Here are 50 gene of raw materials, which is enough to support the byway building for 2 months. Today, 2 months later, I will come to trade with you." Su Huanli was stunned. The mysterious person even knew the liquidity of the Su family. It was terrible. Li Yin sighed and said nothing. It was easy for a senior in the acquired 9th hurdle to deal with a small aristocratic family like the Su family. Su Huanli was extremely aggrieved, but he still took out the bank notes from his arms and handed them over. Su Li took them and nodded. 5 bank notes of the Wanong Money House. "Good. You are sincere. See you 2 months later." Then, Su Li floated away like a light smoke and disappeared in the mountain forest in the blink of an eye. Su Huanli held 25 kilograms of raw materials and seemed to lose all his strength. After a while, he buried his head and cried bitterly. "Ah, my silver." Li Yin stood aside and sighed secretly. The Su family was also unlucky. In this kind of situation, they could only grit their teeth and swallow the blood. On the other side, Suli restored her original appearance and returned to the Jinyuan court. She looked extremely calm, as if the 50,000 taels of silver could not shake her heart at all. Lies, the Su Su Shue Shies and she need to find the Jin, but I can of Jin. Good as I can. I can. I. Of Su of. Li of. Lien of Lien. He, Su Su Li. The next day, Su Li asked Fang Yuan to go to other towns to buy a large number of bamboos and pile them in the valley. After several trips, Fang Yuan was so tired that he had dark circles under his eyes. He also bought almost all the construction materials. After a few days' rest, Su Li asked him to build the bamboo house and gave him the construction plan. Fang Yuan wailed and didn't want to move. But Su Li just said one sentence, and he moved again. The bamboo house is built. You and your sister will have a home. Don't you want to? Almost every day after midnight, there would be a figure exuding a weary aura working hard in the valley. After a month, the bamboo house was finally built. Only the furnishings inside were missing. Fang Yuan was so tired that he collapsed on the ground. Looking at the two-story bamboo house in front of him, he couldn't help but feel proud and expectant. He had been wandering for many years. He didn't expect to have a home. Su Li looked at the bamboo house and nodded with satisfaction. She turned back and smiled. Have a rest? Don't worry about it. I will arrange it. Fang Yuan moved a little and was about to ask Su Li how to move the furniture. Suddenly, he felt a change in his pubic region. Was he going to break through? He had been stuck in the acquired fifth hurdle for a whole year. He found an opportunity because of extreme fatigue. Su Li was surprised, but this expression was soon covered up. Fang Yuan didn't see it. He looked up and said, "You are smart and have special skills. But after all, you are an ordinary person who has never practiced. Be careful." I will be careful. Su Li didn't expose her cultivation. Instead, she nodded. Fang Yuan shook his head slightly and said helplessly, "It's a pity that my practice method is only suitable for men. Ling can only be an ordinary person. Otherwise, I will pass the practice method to you. In this way, you can have some ability to protect yourself." It doesn't matter. Su Li's eyes flashed. She left the valley and let Fang Yuan stay here to practice alone. The next day, Fang Yuan really asked for leave and didn't come to the restaurant. No one knew where he went to practice in isolation. Su Li was normal during the day. At night, she was like Fang Yuan these days. She disguised herself and went to other towns to buy furniture. Then she moved into the bamboo house. It only took her a few days to decorate the bamboo house. The next night, Fang Yuan came to the bamboo house with his sister Fang Ling. He immediately exclaimed. The two-story bamboo house in front of him had changed a lot. I have made arrangements. The poisonous smoke will not float to the first floor. Su Li promised. Fang Yuan's eyes twitched. It turned out that she wanted him to make arrangements for this purpose. After a short silence, Fang Yuan fixed his eyes and said in a low voice, "I still don't understand. Even if the dishes are developed by you, you are a member of the Su family. What's the difference between you and your father? After all, he is your family. Unlike me and Fang Ling, our parents have died long ago. You don't have to be capricious. You should learn to cherish." As he said, Fang Yuan couldn't speak as if his throat was held by hands. He widened his eyes and saw the girl in front of him gently opened her sleeves and showed her arms. He thought that such a delicate girl's arms must be as white as lotus, but he was wrong. Su Li gently stroked the crisscross scars on her arms and still smiled. "These scars are all over my body. They were done by my mother, but my father turned a blind eye. Do you think that as long as you have both parents, you will be happy?" Fang Yuan trembled slightly. He took a deep breath and suppressed the shock in his eyes. He couldn't help crying when he saw the scars. But she was smiling? "I was reckless. I'm sorry." Fang Yuan helplessly helped Su Li to cover her sleeves. He felt pity for her. There seemed to be a reason for all the strange behaviors of the girl in front of him. But he didn't dare to speak lightly, for fear of touching the scars in her heart again. "You don't have to feel guilty. What I will do in the future will inevitably be dangerous. You have to practice hard to protect me." Su Li's tone was gentle. Fang Yuan was stunned, and immediately nodded as if he was injected with infinite power. At this moment, he swore in his heart that he would never let the girl who always smiled in front of him be hurt. After settling down Feng Yuan and his sister, Su Li finally promoted her apparent cultivation to the third hurdle after a few days. Qi Xianqing was overjoyed. After the morning class, he immediately took Su Li back to the Baiqiaotang. At this moment, there was a long queue in the Baiqiaotang. They were all ordinary people who came to see a doctor. Qi Xianqing was busy for a while and didn't have time until noon. He led Su Li to the back room and solemnly said, as if it was instinct, a stream of star force began to condense in her palms and finally turned into a green star the size of an ant. If one didn't look carefully, he couldn't see it at all. Qi Xianqing walked in and saw this scene. He felt sorry but also gratified. My apprentice, you have condensed the Jupiter force like me. In the future, after your morning classes, you can come with me to see patients and learn how to cure diseases and save lives. I will teach you all my life's knowledge. Yes, master. Su Li nodded obediently. Qi Xianqing thought it was a pity. If Su Li could awaken the killing type of star power like his master, coupled with her inner beauty body, she might be able to break through the inborn realm. The road ahead of Jupiter power was a little narrow after all. At noon, Qi Xianqing made a medicated diet for Su Li to recuperate her body. After eating it, the fatigue accumulated from decorating the bamboo building in the past few days disappeared. As the best clinic in the Desu town, the Baiqiaotang was overcrowded almost every day. After Qi Xianqing told Su Li to sit beside the medicine cabinet and memorize the medicinal materials, he hurriedly sat down and began to see patients in the afternoon. Su Li looked at 4 or 5 assistants who were busy shuttling between the medicine cabinets. Her heart was slightly stirred. In the previous life, she poisoned people and cured people in this life. Could it be that God wanted her to wash away all her sins? It was ridiculous. After staying for about 4 hours, Su Li went to the Baiwei building for a stroll and then returned to the Su house. Unexpectedly, she heard the noise in the main courtyard when she just came back. She was curious and walked into the hospital. Suddenly, she heard a familiar young voice. Uncle, don't forget that I am a supervisor. If I didn't control you from the inside, how could you snatch food from Li Shanbao? You'd better think about it. A few days later, it will be my grandfather's 70th birthday. It is not too late to tell me the answer at that time. You? Uncle, I'm leaving. Ha ha ha. In the laughter, the footsteps approached. Su Li immediately hid in the bushes. The next moment, Yang Wei walked out with a proud face. It seemed that he had vented his anger because he was inexplicably driven out a few days ago. Crash! There was a sound of the teacup breaking in the main courtyard. Su Li's eyes flashed. She didn't go in to explore and turned away. Back to the Jinyuan court, Mammy Li had prepared the dinner. Su Li ate slowly and meditated from time to time. The sudden arrival of the Yang family must mean that they got some news. Most likely, the matter that she stole raw materials and forced the Su family was exposed. The Yang family threatened to get more profits. 70th birthday, Su Li looked up at the full moon outside the window. In the previous life, she was not qualified to attend the banquet of the Yang family. In the morning of the next day, Su Li got up and found several boxes of expensive cloth piled up in the courtyard. She felt strange. Mammy Li came over and smiled. Miss, these were sent by the master of the Yang family yesterday. How should we deal with them? Yang Wei? Su Li frowned slightly and soon relaxed. She said, these cloth are valuable. Send them to the accountant of the main courtyard. I don't need such expensive cloth. Mammy Li was stunned and immediately smiled bitterly. Although the miss had become an important figure in the Su family, she didn't have as many expensive clothes as Su Zipei. Wouldn't it be just right to make a few sets of clothes with these luxurious cloth? Seeing Su Li's unquestionable expression, Mammy Li sighed and ordered the servants to move the cloth away. After a busy day, Su Li came back in the night, but she found that there were several more boxes of cloth in the courtyard. Although they were not as expensive as the ones she saw in the morning, they were also the materials commonly used by misses. In addition to the cloth, there were a lot of jewelry. Mammy Lee. Su Li called Mammy Lee. Mammy Lee quickly waved her hand and explained, Miss, the cloth in the morning has been sent to the accountant. These are all sent by the old butler. He said that the master asked you to buy more clothes. In a few days, it will be the birthday of the master of the Yang family. You can't wear poor clothes and lose the face of the Su family. Su Li understood clearly. She nodded and ordered Mammy Lee to send the cloth to the tailor to make clothes. At this moment, in the warehouse, Su Huanli looked at the expensive cloth piled up in the warehouse and sighed softly. This girl always thinks about the family. She is so sensible that I feel sorry for her. Li Yin leaned over and whispered, in the past few months, under the management of the second miss, the business of the restaurant is booming. The profit is almost double the previous one. Master, you should be happy. Don't sigh. Su Huanli shook his head and said, the little bastard of the Yang family is too much. What can you do? Now our family has been blackmailed by the thief. There is no profit for a long time. I don't know who leaked the news to the Yang family. When it rains, it pours. We are so unlucky. Lin thought for a moment and replied, after all, Master Yang Wei is the supervisor of the Dehan dynasty. If I do something, I will violate the taboo. I can do nothing about it. Su Huanli felt suffocated. What happened recently was really suffocating. If the Baiwei building was not profitable, he would have been sick in bed because of anger. A few days passed in a flash. In the blink of an eye, it was the 70th birthday of the old master of the Yang family. The moon was in the middle of the sky. The whole Yang mansion was brightly lit and decorated with lanterns and streamers. In front of the gate, there was a lot of traffic. Gorgeous carriages were parked. Miss, we arrive at the Yang family. Mammy Lee shouted beside the carriage engraved with the mark of the Su family. The curtain was lifted, and Su Li, in a white dress, walked down slowly. For a moment, the young talents of the big families around couldn't help but look at her and were stunned. Even with the cover of the Nothing Unusual, Su Li was still extremely beautiful with light makeup. She had almost perfect and delicate facial features, tender and smooth skin, and a graceful figure. She instantly attracted the attention of other young ladies from other families. Haha, cousin, you are finally here. With a hearty laugh, Yang Wei in a golden robe appeared from the door. He walked to Su Li and didn't care about the jealous eyes of other childs. He said kindly, your aunt has been looking forward to you for a long time. Come with me to the back hall. Su Li smiled sweetly and said softly, cousin, lead the way. I have never come to the Yang family to visit my aunt. The gentle voice immediately made Yang Wei have a reaction. There was a warm current surging between his nostrils. On the surface, he pretended to be a gentleman and reached out to welcome Su Li into the courtyard. It was not time yet, so most of the seats were empty. Su Li followed Yang Wei to walk in the corridor in the backyard of the Yang family. Yang Wei deliberately slowed down his pace and kept pace with Su Li. He got closer and closer. Su Li dodged without a trace. Yang Wei desperately tried to get close to her, but he found that he couldn't touch Su Li's little hand. He was extremely annoyed. Why was this girl so slippery? He couldn't even take advantage of her. Yang Wei was about to continue to try, but Su Li stopped and asked with a smile, cousin, which yard is my aunt in? We have walked around the corridor 3 times. Yang Wei was suddenly embarrassed, but fortunately, he was extremely cheeky. He immediately said, right here, come with me. This time, Yang Wei didn't dare to continue to take Su Li in a circle. After passing through a garden, he walked into Su Yuezhu's room. When Su Yuezhu saw Su Li, she was amazed. Zhu Yin was not beautiful. How could she have such a beautiful daughter? It was unreasonable. She couldn't help but feel jealous in her heart. Thinking of this, Su Yuezhu stepped forward and held Su Li's hand. She said affectionately, you are Su Li. You are really amazing. You are much more beautiful than your sister. Aunt, you flatter me. Li is not as beautiful as you. After giving birth to cousin, she is still like a young girl. She is not old at all. Su Li responded politely to kill time. Su Yuezhu originally wanted to get more information from Su Li and inquire about the current situation of the Su family. But no matter how she asked, Su Li misunderstood her meaning and gave irrelevant answers, which made Su Yuezhu very angry. In the blink of an eye, It was time to start the banquet. Su Yuezhu forced a smile and sent Su Li to the banquet. But she complained in her heart, "This girl always says something useless. Is she stupid because of cooking?" When they arrived at the front yard, Su Yuezhu had no time to take care of Su Li. She went to Yongli to deal with the guests. Su Li found a seat for the younger generation and sat down. She carefully wiped her hands. Although her status in the previous life was humble, the scandal of Su Yuezhu and her son was almost known to everyone. Even the maids often mentioned it. Therefore, she knew it. It was hard to say whether Yang Wei was Yang Li's biological son. After a while, the birthday banquet finally officially started. The Li family of Hongjin presents 1,000 taels of silver. May Master Yang Hui be as happy as the East Sea and live as long as the South Mountain. The Zhu family presents a red jade coral. May Master Yang Hui live a long life. The Yang family. With the announcement of the attendance, the masters of the families finally arrived. The atmosphere of the whole banquet suddenly became warm. Yang Hui appeared in new clothes and stood in front of the main table. He was hale and hearty. He laughed loudly and said, "Thank you for coming to my birthday banquet. Thanks to your care, the business of my Yang family can have today's achievements. Today, let's eat and drink well. Don't go home until you are drunk." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a sudden uproar. "Good, Master. You are old but strong. Good job. Let me propose a toast to you." At the same time, at the table of the younger generation, the child sitting around Su Li also took the opportunity to propose a toast to her, which made other misses angry. In the past, they were flattered by men wherever they went. How could they be treated coldly like today? You coquettish vixen of the Su family. I, Lin Xiang, will not let you off. The girl at the next table was so angry that her face turned pale. If ice could kill, Su Li would have died thousands of times. Su Zipei sat beside her and whispered, "Sister, don't be angry. My second sister has always been arrogant and has an extremely bad temper. She is not as gentle and virtuous as you. She just knows how to cook." Hearing what Su Zipei said, Lin Xiang felt much better. She nodded gently and said, "Sister, you are really sensible. I will expose Su Li's true colors when I have a chance, so that Child Yang and others will not be cheated." Su Zipei's eyes flashed with malice. She whispered, "Sister, don't wait. There is an excellent opportunity now." Chapter 46. I heard that you have that kind of medicine. How about, in this way, my second sister's reputation will be ruined, and no one can save her. Su Zipei secretly gestured with her hands. Lin Xiang's face suddenly changed and became gloomy. How did Su Zipei know that she had that kind of medicine? "Sister, don't worry. I will never tell others." Su Zipei looked anxious and said, "As long as you are willing to help, Zipei will be at your service in the future." Lin Xiang pondered for a moment and glanced at Zhu Yin, who was sitting on the elder's seat without feeling anything. A smile flashed across her mouth. It was interesting that blood sisters would kill each other. "Well, I will help you once. Let Su Li become a slut and lose her reputation." After 3 rounds of drinking, the atmosphere became more and more warm. Tonight, no one talked about the grievances between families in advance. It could be said that the host and the guests were all happy. Su Li also drank several cups of wine. The childs from aristocratic families kept toasting to her like crazy bees and butterflies. It was really annoying. She had to pretend to be drunk. In this way, many young men who boasted of being considerate didn't come forward. "Everyone in the Desu town knows your name, my sister. Now that I see you, you are really worthy of your reputation. Your beauty is really enviable." Lin Xiang gracefully walked forward with 2 cups of tea in her hands. It seems that younger sister is already drunk. Elder sister will use tea in place of wine to toast younger sister. Su Li didn't doubt her. She took the teacup and said with a smile, "Thank you, sister. I just feel thirsty after drinking too much." Then she drank up the tea in the cup. Su Zipei, who stood in the distance, saw this scene and was ecstatic. Su Li, no matter how great your ability is, you can't escape today's disaster. After tonight, how can you be so noble?" Lin Xiang was relieved in her heart, but her expression didn't change. After a few polite words with Su Li, she turned around and left. After Lin Xiang went away, although Su Li still had a smile on her face, her forehead was sweating. She forced a smile and said, "I suddenly feel uncomfortable and want to go to the guest room for a while. Excuse me." Then she hurriedly left the seat without waiting for the invitation of the childs to accompany her. "Sister Zipei, the medicine is about to take effect. You have to quickly lead people to the guest room. Otherwise, all the previous efforts will be wasted. Don't blame me." Lin Xiang exhorted Su Zipei and left. It was not suitable for her to stay here. Su Zipei nodded in acknowledgement before turning her head and locking her resentful gaze onto Yang Wei. "Cousin, I want to give you a big gift. You have to thank me properly." As for Su Li, she went all the way to the backyard of the Yang family, but she found an empty room and didn't go to the guest room at all. When they saw a large group of people around the bed, Su Yuezhu's pupils dilated. She screamed and fainted directly. Yang Wei tremblingly got down from Su Yuezhu. His face was extremely pale. Looking at his father's murderous eyes, his legs softened and he knelt down, crying hoarsely, "Father, it's not what you think. It's my mother who seduced me. I didn't mean it. Bastard. I'll kill you." Yang Li's eyes were red. He picked up Yang Huai's crutch and smashed it down. Others immediately rushed to separate them. It would be terrible if someone was killed. How could it be my aunt? Su Zipei was completely dumbfounded. No matter how she thought, she couldn't understand why the person on the bed was not Su Li but Su Yuezhu. "Mom, Su Zipei still wanted to say something, but her mouth was covered by Zhu Yin. "You have been set up. Don't you know it? It's Lin Xiang." Su Zipei was shocked and immediately filled with hatred. "Bitch, you even deceived me." Su Huanli's face was very ugly. Su Yuezhu's disobedience would inevitably cast a shadow on the reputation of the Su family. Maybe even Su Li's reputation outside would be affected, which would affect the business of the Baiwei building. It's a big scandal. Poor head of the Yang family. He was cuckolded by his own son. No one could bear it. Yang Wei is a supervisor. This time, the matter is exposed. Maybe he will lose his official position. The guests who left talked about it. Su Li, who had just returned to the Yang house, heard their words. The scandal of Su Yuezhu is exposed? Su Li was surprised. Thinking of the unusual movement in the courtyard before, she couldn't help but feel strange. Did Su Yuezhu drink that cup of tea? "Li, why are you standing here?" At this time, Su Huanli walked out of the house and met Su Li. He was followed by Zhu Yin and Su Zipei. Su Li took a deep look at Su Zipei and immediately explained, "I drank too much and felt dizzy, so I came out to take a breath. By the way, what happened on Earth? Why do I hear these guests?" It's what your aunt did." Su Huanli's expression became gloomy. He waved his sleeves and said, "Go back. Don't contact your aunt so as not to get into trouble." Su Li nodded, but she had mixed feelings in her heart. After her rebirth, many things deviated from the original track because of her intervention. She vaguely remembered that Su Yuezhu was exposed in the previous life. It should be 2 years later. The next day, when Su Li just returned to the Jinyuan court after the morning class, she saw Mammy Li sneakily approaching and whispering in her ear, "Miss, the investigation result of the Yang family is out. It turns out that Master Yang drugged his mother. Master Yang Wei is really a bastard. He even hurt his own mother." "Oh?" Su Li raised her eyebrows and quickly figured out the cause and effect. Li Shanbao didn't like Yang Wei for a long time. No matter what happened, Li Shanbao would inevitably write to the satrap to impeach Yang Wei. The officials of the Dahan country valued filial piety and incorruptibility most. Now Yang Wei violated one of the big taboos, so he would inevitably lose his official position. Even if he had a relationship with the people in the satrap, there was no way. But without Yang Wei, the Baiwei building will be in danger. Su Li frowned slightly. She didn't expect this change. Although she knew the track of events after her rebirth, she was not a god. Naturally, she didn't expect this accident. At this moment, in the magistrate's mansion, Li Wei's face was red and the chair under him creaked. He said, "Uncle, this is really a wonderful move. Without Yang Wei, we can take control of the Baiwei building again." Li Shanbao snorted and said, "The Yang family is no longer a threat. Nobody from the Zhu family and the Su family is in the imperial court. I must get the Baiwei building. No one can stop me." "Uncle, now the Baiwei building is not the previous Baiwei building. It makes nearly 3,000 taels of silver a day. If we can get it back, we will be rich." Li Wei was so excited that he breathed heavily. He said, "This is 3 times the profit of the previous Baiwei building. The little girl of the Su family does have some means." Li Shanbao shook his head, as if everything was in his hands. He said, "She will continue to manage the restaurant. The precious beggar's chicken can't be interrupted. Besides, the quantity of the beggar's chicken should be increased every month and the business should be expanded to other towns." Su Li seemed to be a slave of the Li family. Li Shanbao imagined the glorious future and almost drooled. At this moment, a soldier outside the door asked respectfully, "Master, 2 letters were sent from the county city just now. I am afraid that the results of this year's preliminary examination have come out. Bring them to me." Li Shanbao waved his hand and laughed. Although Su Qingtian was good, he had a broad vision. Such a young man in the county city was simply mediocre, and it was impossible for him to pass the preliminary examination. Because he was sure that Su Qingtian could not pass the preliminary examination, he could safely plan the Baiwei building. As for special cases like Yang Wei, it was really because he was lucky. But Su Qingtian was not so lucky. Thinking of this, Li Shanbao opened the results and glanced at the last few names on the list. As expected, Su Qingtian's name was not on the list. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Sure enough, as I thought. How could anyone pass the preliminary examination in such a small place as the Desu town? Li Shanbao was about to close the results, but Li Wei screamed, "Uncle, look at the front of the results." Li Shanbao was stunned. He looked back at the results and muttered in his heart, "Could Su Qingtian be among the best?" Li Shanbao was shocked. He looked back and looked at the results. He muttered in his heart, "Could Su Qingtian be among the best?" When he looked back, Li Shanbao was shocked as if he was struck by lightning. The results fell to the ground with a clatter. Su Qingtian. After the shock, Li Shanbao calmed down and had a cold sweat all over his body. The young talents who could get the first place in the preliminary examination could skip the second examination and go to the National Academy to rest for a year. Then they could go to Yunjing to meet the emperor and participate in the highest standard palace examination. As long as the results of the palace examination were not too bad, they could get a 5th-grade official position at least. Compared with him, a low-level official, there was a big difference. Chapter 47. Li Shanbao looked pale. There were many talents in Dahan country every year. Of course, he knew that it was impossible. Su Qingtian really had the ability to be one of the top talents in Dahan country. When the palace examination ended, Su Qingtian would definitely become a rising star in Yunjing. At that time, not to mention one Baiwei building, even if there were 100 Baiwei buildings, he might not be satisfied. Damn it! Why didn't I know that Su Qingtian was a hidden talent? Li Shanbao squatted down to pick up the notice and quickly told Li Wei to put away another letter. This letter was written by Su Qingtian to his family. It could be seen that Su Qingtian had grasped a certain power in the notice, which was beyond his control. "Do you want to give the Baiwei building to others?" Li Wei was very reluctant to give it up. "You are silly." Li Shanbao scolded and snorted. "When the news spreads, even the Zhu family will let go and let the Su family monopolize the Baiwei building. Do you think that Su Qingtian will still care about the Baiwei building after he comes back? The Su family will definitely move to Yunjing with Su Qingtian. We can't offend them. Now it is the right thing to try to make friends with the Su family. I heard that Su Qingtian dotes on Su Li very much. Hurry to prepare for it. I will visit the Su family in person." Li Shanbao's sudden visit naturally aroused Su Huanli's vigilance. But when he received the letter from Su Qingtian, he immediately reacted. He was ecstatic and a series of thoughts appeared in his mind. These thoughts could be summed up in one sentence. The Su family would be completely prosperous. It's great. Master, Qingtan should be the first in the preliminary examination. The second madam's eyes turned red and she cried. Su Huanli held the second madam and comforted her softly. Why are you crying? Our son is successful. You should be happy. Su Huanli's tone was unprecedentedly gentle. The second madam, Li Yuelyan, was Su Qingtan's biological mother. A mother's status depended on her son's status. Li Yuelyan's status in Su Huanli's heart immediately surpassed that of Zhu Yin and was only second to Su Qingtan. Even Su Li was pushed down to the third place. On the second day, Li Shanbao posted the notice. The news that Su Qingtan won the first in the preliminary examination immediately aroused public opinion in the Desu town. Even the scandal of the Yang family was temporarily suppressed. Everywhere, people could hear the name Su Qingtan. Big brother won first place in the preliminary test? Su Li was shocked by the news. In the previous life, the eldest brother took part in the preliminary examination 1 year later, but he didn't even enter the top 3. Although he passed the second examination, he missed the chance to enter the National Academy. He couldn't compare with the young talents in Yunjing and ranked last in the imperial examination. Who would have thought that in this life, Big Brother would obtain the title of first place in the preliminary examination just 1 year earlier? It seems that the talents from Qinghe County participating in the preliminary examination this year are indeed not as outstanding as next year. But it doesn't affect my plan. You still need to stay in the Sinology Academy for another year. Su Li tapped the table with her slender fingers and looked through the window into the distance. It was Yunjing, the capital of the Dahan country. In her previous life, she vaguely heard people talking about his background. In this life, he should be there, but she did not know what his identity was. Time flew by unconsciously. Su Li's daily schedule was full, and she had no time to rest or be lazy. She was also happy. In the past half a month, she had memorized the medicinal materials that Qi Xianqing asked her to identify. She ran the nothing unusual every day and acted as a manservant of the Baichao Tang. Except for Qi Xianqing, no one knew Su Li's real identity. These days, the Zhu family was not stupid. Like the Yang family, they completely let go of the Baiwei building and promised that all the profits would belong to the Su family. Every day, there were noble families visiting them. Even Su Zipei, who had been despised by others, came to propose marriage. They just wanted to have a relationship with Su Qingtan. Now Su Huanli's vision was high. Of course, he would not agree. He also expected his 2 daughters to go to Yunjing and marry into nobles. How could he take a fancy to these small families in the countryside? Well, I didn't expect that Li Yuelyan's son was so promising. Zhu Yin patted the table lightly and gnashed her teeth. Now her status in the Su family was low. Su Huanli also didn't come to her for several months. Those maids looked at her in a strange way. However, I am worried that I can't go to Yunjing to inquire about the news. When Zipei returns to the family with the jade pendant, even if I am only an adoptive mother, no one in the Su family can compare with my identity. In the past half a year, she almost didn't come out to stir up trouble. She let Su Li develop freely. The progress of the jade pendant was accelerated a lot. Just a few days ago, she had found that only the members of the royal family were qualified to have this kind of jade pendant. Maybe her daughter could become a princess of the dynasty. In the blink of an eye, the whole Desu town fell into silence. In front of an inconspicuous yard in the forest outside the town, a man in black stood respectfully and quietly. His eyes were bright and full of unprecedented expectation. The child is coming. I don't know whether the file I prepared can satisfy the child. When the man in black was in a perturbed mood, an ordinary carriage stopped in front of the yard. The man in black immediately saluted and said, "I am Black Star. Welcome to the child." The cold-looking young man in the coachman's clothes jumped out of the carriage. His eyes were as cold as lightning. His cultivation was not worse than that of Feng Yuan. Such an excellent young man seemed to be a servant of the child mentioned by the man in black. When the coachman saw the handsome young man, his pupil shrank immediately. He bowed his head and said respectfully, "The head of the building proprietor is also here." The cold-looking young man nodded slightly and lifted the curtain of the carriage. A face with a jade bone mask appeared. At the same time, a breeze blew through Black Star's face. The latter seemed to be hit hard and groaned. But he was not angry. Instead, he was surprised and said, "The child has broken through again." The thin lips under the jade bone mask were raised. A pair of deep eyes seemed to contain the boundless starry sky, which made people unconsciously immersed in it. "Let's go in first." With a low and magnetic voice, the air slightly vibrated and was filled with pressure. Black Star immediately woke up and welcomed them in. Black Star served the prepared tea. The jade-bone young man sat down, and the cold-looking young man stood aside. Black Star suddenly didn't dare to sit down. He respectfully bowed like a servant. After a while, the cold-looking young man said, "How is the situation in the Qinghe province?" Black Star quickly presented the file. The cold-looking young man put it away without looking at it. He had always been responsible for killing. There were others who were responsible for consulting files and strategizing. "Black Star, you said that there was an extraordinary woman in the Desu town." The jade-bone masked young man opened his lips slightly. There was a strange fluctuation in his voice, which showed that he was very interested in the extraordinary woman in Black Star's words. Yes, Black Star immediately told him what he had seen and heard. He also talked about glutinous rice balls with sesame and beggar's chicken, which he had never heard of. The cold-looking young man nodded and said, "Master, you have made a lot of delicacies, but you have never heard of glutinous rice balls with sesame and beggar's chicken. I'm afraid that it is just a coincidence that Suli can make zongzi." The jade-bone masked young man didn't speak, but he was very shocked in his heart. Zongzi, glutinous rice balls with sesame, beggar's chicken. Black Star and Lingamo didn't know, but it didn't mean that he didn't know, because these were the local delicacies of the Hua nation on the blue planet before his time travel. Is it possible that this woman also came from the Earth like me? The jade-bone masked young man was lost in thought. The cold-looking young man was surprised. For the first time, he saw the master was lost in thought because of a woman. Even the holy girl of the cult desperately threw herself at him. The master didn't waver at all. Interesting. Lingamo, arrange it. I want to observe it in person. The tone of the jade-bone masked young man was irrefutable. The cold-looking young man could only swallow his words. They came to the Desu town not only for the files and Suli. If only these two trifles, how could the noble master come in person? Master is suddenly interested in Suli, don't delay the business. The cold-looking young man sighed and didn't speak. Black Star understood the meaning of the child and immediately asked, "Should we inform the branch of the holy cult?" "This trip is confidential. Don't tell the people of the branch to avoid trouble." The jade-bone masked young man gave an order and immediately stepped out. It seemed that he had crossed a distance of several meters. The cold-looking young man followed him and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The progress of the child Xiangong is really terrible. I can't see it clearly. Black Star stood at the door and sighed in his heart. It was really infuriating to compare with others. There were 3 religions and 9 schools in the Jianghu, and the hierarchy was strict. The Wulin, composed of ordinary martial arts, was the lowest level of the Jianghu. This kind of people usually define their strength by their years of practice. However, no matter how powerful the martial arts master was, he could only stop at the acquired 3rd hurdle in his life. This was the limitation brought by the practice method. If he practiced Xiangong, he could reach the acquired 1st hurdle as long as he could get started. He could save countless years of hard work and soar to the sky. The Jianghu, composed of masters of Xiangong, was also called the martial arts circle. Black Star thought that he had reached the acquired 4th hurdle as soon as he turned 18 this year. He was an extraordinary silver card killer of the Shuelo cult. However, he knew that his insignificant cultivation was far from enough in front of his young master. In the evening, the cool breeze was blowing. Suli came out of the Baichao Tang and felt a little cold. No wonder. It will be the Mid-Autumn Festival in half a month. Suli sighed in a low voice. Maybe Qi Xianqing saw that she had worked too hard recently and let her go back earlier. At this moment, the evening market in the Desu town was about to start. Many people were carving melons to make lanterns to prepare for the Mid-Autumn Festival in half a month. Apart from the power of the family, the Desu town is rare to be stable and peaceful. Maybe this is the reason why Qi Xianqing chose to live in seclusion here. Su Li walked on the street with a rare peaceful and warm mood. This kind of feeling was not easy to come by. She also cherished it. Driven by her thoughts, she shuttled through the market like a butterfly. Suddenly, she looked back and saw two young figures under the lanterns not far away. The one in front was holding a folding fan and smiling. Although he was 15 or 16 years old, his handsome face was embedded with a pair of eyes as deep as the starry sky, which made people unable to see his depth. Behind the handsome boy, there was a cold boy with a stiff smile. He didn't smile for many years, so he smiled very reluctantly. This face. Su Li unconsciously stopped and stared at the boy who came to her. The light and shadow around her seemed to be infinitely far away. Only the sound of her heartbeat could be heard. Master, is it really appropriate for you not to wear a mask? Following the child, Ling Yimo helplessly whispered. The boy smiled and shook his head. It's rare to come to this border town to relax and be carefree. Do you even care about this? Master, I don't mean that. Ling Yimo hurriedly waved his hand, but he saw the child in front of him suddenly stopped, which almost made him bump into him. She quickly wiped her hands and came over with concern. Miss, what's wrong with you? Did someone bully you? I'll go tell Master right now. Mammy, I'm fine. Su Li forced a smile and said, I just went shopping and was blinded by the sand. Really? Mammy Li obviously didn't believe it, but Su Li was obviously unwilling to say it. There was no result if she kept asking. Mammy Li could only comfort Su Li softly and boil a whole bucket of bathwater to let Su Li relax. Lying in the bathtub, Su Li's disordered breathing gradually calmed down, and she finally became her usual self. He lost his composure. She didn't expect to see him so soon. Now his limbs were healthy, and his whole body exuded the outstanding spirit of a young talent. Unlike in the previous life, he was obviously less than 30 years old, but he was lethargic and determined to die. In this life, she wanted to build enough power to help him succeed. Even if she couldn't succeed, she wanted to help him escape successfully. He would not become a disabled person at the mercy of others like in the previous life. She also wanted to go to the place in Yunjing to investigate the mystery of her mother's death. If it was really that person who did it, she would kill him personally. She also wanted to see Su Zipei's future husband. If she could, she must kill his whole family to avenge her child in the previous life. 3 wishes are enough. Su Li slowly closed her eyes. Didn't God let her come back to life for revenge? As for him, forget him. Su Li took a deep breath and sank into the water. After a long time, an extremely depressed sigh came from the room. At this moment, in the best guest room of the Baiwei building, the teenager lay on the bed and turned over. His mind was full of the girl who was crying like a fragile porcelain bottle. What does she know? Is it possible that she also came with me? The teenager muttered to himself. During the day, he had found out the identity of the girl. When he asked who Su Li was in this town, he and Ling Yimo were laughed at by others. Is it really you, Shui, who can cook the Huaxia delicacies like him? The teenager closed his eyes and couldn't help but think of the cold eyes before the time travel. Third brother, you really deserve to be the strongest sword in my hand. Go in peace. Leave the Ling family to me, Ling Shui. More than 10 years passed in the blink of an eye, but the cold words were still like a curse from hell, often appearing in his ears. In the previous life, he didn't understand why his sister, who had always liked him the most, suddenly killed him. Ling Yimo sat at the table and pretended to take a nap. He looked at the appearance of the master on the bed. He furrowed his brows. Ever since he was young, he had rarely seen his young master reveal such an expression. Could it be because of the woman during the day? A hidden killing intent flashed in his eyes. Since the master was so worried, he had to find out the truth of the girl and solve the trouble for the master. For him, the master was everything. No matter what else, even his own life, had to stand aside. The red leaves fell very fast. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of the Mid-Autumn Festival sacrifice. There were lanterns made of hollowed melons everywhere in the Desu town. The Mid-Autumn Festival sacrifice was one of the few major festivals in the Dahan country. Every time on this day, all families would change into new clothes to celebrate the harvest and put offerings at home to thank the gods for their kindness. In the center of the square in front of the byway building in the Desu town, a pagoda with a height of several meters was built. Firewood was added in it. After it was ignited, it was as exquisite as a fire tree. People worshipped around the pagoda for a peaceful life. Suli wore a newly made goose-yellow dress. The flame reflected half of her white face. She stood in front of the pagoda and looked far away. No one knew what was going on. Mammy Lee couldn't help but sigh. Since the mist came back that day, she became silent. Mammy Lee didn't know what happened, but she was sure that it was not the sign of lovesickness. When she was young, she had been pregnant, so she could see the difference in her expression. Suli bowed to the pagoda and straightened up. Then she saw two teenagers walking in the crowd not far away. She blinked and turned into the byway building. Mammy Lee quickly caught up with her and said, "Miss, the sacrifice is not over yet. Why do you leave?" The teenager seemed to feel something and turned his head, but he only saw a figure disappearing in a moment. "Is she avoiding me?" The teenager's heart sank slightly. He couldn't figure out Suli's mood. At this moment, Lingamo leaned over and whispered, "Master, there is a result of tracking down the traitor." The teenager immediately came to his sense. His eyes were bright. He turned around and left without saying anything. Lingamo followed him and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. As long as the traitor was dealt with and they returned to Yunjing for a long time, the master would definitely forget this woman. At that time, he wouldn't be melancholy. "Mammy Lee, I am a little tired. I will go back to the Jinyuan court to have a rest. You stay in the byway building to help." Suli gave the order. Before Mammy Lee responded, she had put on a cloak and disappeared into the night. "Miss," Mammy Lee hurriedly shouted. She was confused. Did the miss see something again and get stimulated? Why didn't she see it? The sacrifice ceremony and the lantern festival in the Desu town were held in the center of the town. Suli turned 2 lanes. Then she could hear nothing except the vague noise in the distance. Suli exhaled a long breath and her eyes became clear. When she was about to step forward, there was a very slight sound of breaking the air behind her. Suli's pupil shrank suddenly. She took a breath of vital energy to avoid the vital parts. The next moment, puff! 3 flying knives flashing with cold light brushed Suli's arm. They were nailed on the bluestone slab with a tinkling sound. Suli immediately found that her right arm was out of control. Then half of her body was numb. "It's poisonous." Suli saw the blue light on the edge of the flying knife. She reacted instantly and put a self-made detoxification pill into her mouth. At this time, there were 3 sounds of breaking the air behind her. When she turned around, they were already close to her back. At the time of crisis, Suli didn't panic at all. She took advantage of the numb half of her body to lie down and instantly avoided all the flying knives. The person in the dark couldn't help but make a slight sound. She could find an excuse for the first time, but how to explain the second time? Did the miss of the Su family know martial arts? Didn't the buyer say that she was just a little girl who had no strength to truss a chicken? When the assassin was in doubt, Suli snorted coldly and stamped her feet. The bluestone slab was broken into powder instantly. At the same time, Suli turned into a residual shadow and disappeared. The assassin stood on the beam and saw this scene. Suddenly, he felt a chill in his heart and a sense of trembling rushed to the top of his head. Damn it, she had no strength to truss a chicken? This wicked girl was obviously a peerless senior in the martial arts circle. If he hadn't taken her by surprise, he might not have shot Suli at all. Who the hell sent me this task? I'm going to kill him. The assassin roared in his heart. Suddenly, he felt that the back of his neck was light and he couldn't move his whole body. But he didn't even see someone approaching from beginning to end. It's horrible. The assassin's face was full of horror. She is at least a senior in the inborn fourth hurdle. I, who is in the acquired first hurdle, can't even escape. Is this girl really only 17 years old? Impossible. She must be an old monster who has regained her youth. The scene in front of him was constantly changing. The assassin was getting farther and farther away from the Desu town. He was in a panic and wanted to beg for mercy, but his whole body was controlled by Suli and he couldn't even say a word. Suli didn't stop until she arrived at the forest where people rarely came. She looked a little pale. Unexpectedly, she almost died in the hands of this person because of a moment of carelessness. Thinking of the thrill just now, Suli narrowed her eyes and removed the assassin's mask. It was a strange face. The assassin found that his acupoint was unlocked and immediately begged for mercy. "Senior, please spare my life. I didn't mean to offend you. The organization made a mistake in the information. Please spare my life." Junior is willing to be an ox or a horse and do whatever Senior wants. Chapter 49. Back to the Jinyuan court, Suli first treated the wound on her arm. Although the poison had been detoxified under the effect of the detoxification elixir, the wound cracked a lot because of Suli's big movement, and the blood stained a large area of the sleeve. Fortunately, I did not injure my tendons and veins. Otherwise, it would be troublesome. After Suli bandaged the wound, she was expressionless, as if she couldn't feel the pain. But the cold sweat on her forehead betrayed her. She carefully put on clean clothes and melted the blood on the old clothes with special medicine. Then she was completely relaxed. Suli boiled a bucket of hot water for herself. She avoided her right arm and lay in it with a sigh of relief. After a moment of silence, she opened her eyes and mumbled to herself, "Blood Forger Hall." She had heard of this name many times in her previous life. In the martial arts world, there were only 5 famous killer organizations, and the Blood Forger Hall was one of them. It was said that the Hall Master was a top master above the pre-celestial stage. However, the most famous assassin organization was still Shuelo, which had a 0 assassination failure rate. It was said that the owner of the building was excessively young, but his power was no less than that of an old monster. He was even more powerful than the leader of the Blood Forger Hall. But in the previous life, Suli only heard the legend of the Shuelo cult. When she mastered the Book of Poison and made her debut in Jianghu, the Shuelo cult had been destroyed by an unknown existence, and no one survived. The extermination of the Shuelo cult became one of the biggest mysteries in the martial arts world at that time. For a killer organization like this, which was particular about trustworthiness, it was basically impossible to find out any secrets, so when she heard that the killer was coming to her Blood Forger Hall, she did not waste any more time. Who had sent an assassin to kill her and be satisfied with it? Suli held her chin, and Zhu Yan's figure flashed in her mind. Undoubtedly, it was her adoptive mother who wanted to kill her the most. This was not the first time she had tried to kill him, so it was normal for her to send someone else to kill him again. The second possibility was the competitor who hated the business of the Byway building. The scope was too large, so Suli couldn't know the real murderer. There was one last possibility. Suli tightened her lips. He had enough reasons to kill her, because she had heard the legend in her previous life that those who had seen the true face of the hierarch of the Inma cult were all dead. At this moment, there were some waves in the secret stronghold of the blood-refining hall outside the Desu town. Assassin 21's soul tablet has been extinguished, instantly extinguished. He only took one task, which was to assassinate Suli, the miss of the Su family. Suli doesn't have any force, but now she has safely returned to the Su house. I don't know the process. Recently, some spies saw traces of the Inma cult around the Desu town. We'd better not act rashly. The Inma cult is not to be trifled with. Return double the reward. We won't accept this mission. After coming to a conclusion, Zhu Yin quickly got double the money. Looking at the ruthless eyes of the contact person, Zhu Yin swallowed a mouthful of saliva and didn't ask the question in her heart. Recently, the surroundings of the Desu town are very chaotic. Our blood refining hall will not take any task for the time being. Mrs. Zhu, I'll take my leave. After saying this coldly, the contact melted into the night and disappeared. Zhu Yin stood where she was and looked at the heavy silver in her hand, but there was no joy in her heart. Damn it, why is this girl so hard to kill? Zhu Yan's expression was uncertain. She couldn't let Su Li go to Yunjing with them. Otherwise, with Su Li's aptitude and appearance, it was very likely to be recognized by her biological parents. If the matter of the jade pendant was exposed, she and her son would not get any benefits. Instead, they would die without a burial place. There is still 1 year. If the blood refining hall can't do it, I will save money to hire people from the Shuelo cult. Zhu Yin grasped the silver tightly. The Shuelo cult claimed that the mission failure rate was 0. She wanted to hire people from the Shuelo cult this time. Unfortunately, the price of the Shuelo cult was too high. It was 10 times that of the blood refining hall. She couldn't afford it at all. Back to the residence, Zhu Yin put down the silver and rubbed her eyebrows. She looked sad. At this time, Su Zipei came in and her eyebrows were full of surprise. She said, "Mother, I have a solution." She certainly knew that her mother hired a killer to kill Su Li. After experiencing all kinds of humiliation, she was not afraid at the age of 14. Instead, she felt happy and wished that Su Li would die immediately. "Mother, I heard from Miss Lin that there is an extremely famous liar on the South Street. This liar is only 16 or 17 years old. He looks extremely fair and has an extraordinary temperament. If we let him pretend to be the master of Yunjing to propose marriage to Su Li, they can cook the rice." When Su Zipei said half, Zhu Yan's eyes instantly brightened. "Good daughter, you are much smarter than me. I will send someone to arrange it immediately." In the ruined temple on the South Street, a group of ragged little beggars were preparing food. These food were the leftovers of the restaurants and inns, or the things fished out from the swill bucket at the back door of the rich families. In the middle of this group of little beggars, a teenager with a dirty face and extremely clean clothes was eating hard steamed buns and pickles. He swallowed them with difficulty. Compared with the leftovers, the steamed buns and pickles seemed to be worse. But these two things were clean food bought by the teenager from the town. He wouldn't get sick or have diarrhea after eating them. When other little beggars saw the steamed buns in the teenager's hands, they secretly swallowed. But no one snatched them from him. Instead, they looked at him with a rare look of worship. "What are you looking at? Do you want to starve to death? Hurry up and eat." Chu Qingning scolded and couldn't help but sigh. He just escaped to this town, thanks to this group of boys who saved his life. Now, in any case, he would not abandon them. At least, he had to let them eat and wear warm clothes and teach them how to survive on their own. "Eldest brother, you don't have to worry. Although we have cheated a lot of people, those high and mighty families will certainly not notice us. I think it is better to cheat those." In the middle of the words, the little beggar was given a knock by the teenager. "Haydn, are you crazy about money? If we cheat those big families, we can be in prison the next day." Chu Qingning laughed and scolded. This boy usually looked smart, but he was not crazy because of hunger. He wanted to go to those big families, but he would not cheat but steal. With his acquired cultivation of the fifth hurdle, it was easy to steal 1 or 2 families. But his poisonous insect had been trembling. This sign showed that there was definitely a hidden senior in the town. Therefore, he could only give up force and turn to deception. Chu Qingning sighed helplessly. Suddenly, his ears moved slightly, and he looked outside the shabby temple. He saw a maid dressed in rich clothes coming in. She covered her nose and said with disgust, "Are you the swindlers on the South Street? Who is the leader? Our madam invites you." Chu Qingning's eyes immediately brightened. He stood up and walked out with the maid. After a while, Chu Qingning came back. He looked excited and laughed loudly. "Boys, we are going to make a fortune. After finishing this business, we will retire and open a small shop. We don't have to worry about starvation anymore." Early the next morning, Haydn, wearing a clean servant's clothes, drove an expensive carriage and stopped in front of the Su house. The guards of the Su house felt strange, but they saw Chu Qingning open the curtain of the carriage. Chu Qingning, holding a folding fan, stepped on Haydn's back, and walked down. After cleaning up, his temperament was much better than Yang Wei's. That pair of deep and serene eyes, that tall nose bridge, that inexplicably cold smile, immediately made the hearts of the two guards tremble violently. They had never seen such a temperament in any child of the Desu town. He is a big shot. Hurry up and report. Chu Qingning walked to the door and looked at the gate of the Su house. The guard stood in front of him and suddenly felt suffocated. His back was wet in an instant, and he was about to faint. What a terrible momentum. This person, where did he come from? Young master, my master invites you to come in. Soon, another guard walked out from inside and said with a smile on his face. Haydn looked disdainful. He raised his nostrils and said softly, I didn't expect this small family to have some foresight. My master wants to visit the second miss of the Su family today. If you neglect him, you will lose your head. When the guard heard it, cold sweat suddenly dripped down. What was the background of these two people? Why did a little servant want to kill people every time he opened his mouth? Don't embarrass these servants. Haydn, let's go in. Chu Qingning smiled slightly and waved his folding fan and walked in. Haydn snorted coldly and followed him happily. The two guards breathed a sigh of relief. They had never received such a big shot. In the house of the main courtyard, the maids made tea and put it on the table. Su Huanli was at a loss. He didn't know the background of these two people. He smiled and asked, Nephew, you come from afar. May I know which child you are? Before he finished his words, Haydn's expression suddenly became cold and he scolded. How dare you? My master is a relative of the emperor. How dare you call him nephew? Do you want to die? Su Huanli's eyes widened, and he was shocked. A relative of the emperor. The first thought in his mind was doubt. But when he thought of Chu Qingning's extraordinary temperament, he couldn't help feeling honored every time he smiled. He also felt that it was mostly true. This kind of temperament was obviously the majesty that could only be cultivated by sitting in a high position for a long time. Even if he was not a relative of the emperor, he was definitely not a child of an ordinary family. And he was probably a young master. Head of the Su family, it's a little abrupt for me to visit you. But I heard that there is an extraordinary girl in the Su family in the provincial town, so I temporarily decided to come here to have a look. Can you introduce me to you? Then, Haydn took out a token from his arms and gave it to Su Huanli. Su Huanli took it carefully. After looking at it for a long time, he only felt that it was precious, but he couldn't figure out its origin. Haydn held back his laughter in his heart. This was a high imitation he bought from the black market. If it was not professionally identified, it couldn't be distinguished at all. But he pretended to be angry. He pointed at Su Huanli and sneered, Bumpkin, can't you even recognize the token? This is the token of General Wu's mansion of Dahan country. My master is the first master of General's mansion. Su Huanli was so scared that his hands trembled, and he almost broke the token. He immediately changed the token back, and his mind was still in shock. Oh my God! The young master of General's mansion was a real first-class aristocratic family. Chapter 50. Chu Qingning didn't expect that Su Li was reborn in her previous life. Nor did he expect that Su Li had seen Wu Jin's true face in her previous life. When Su Li saw Chu Qingning, she immediately realized that he was a liar. If I marry this person, even if his identity is exposed, I can only accept it. Zhu Yin and Su Zipei will be the happiest. Ho ho. Su Li figured out the cause and effect, but she still smiled gently. She walked to Chu Qingning and bowed slightly. She said softly, I'm Su Li, child Wu. Chu Qingning was stunned. He had heard of Su Li's reputation in the Desu town, but he never expected that there would be such a pure and beautiful person in this barren town. He had been in the Nanjiang country for more than 10 years, but he had never seen such a beauty. He almost drooled. Boss, you must hold on. Haydn wailed in his heart, and he couldn't move his eyes away from Su Li. He was a beggar, and his knowledge was far less than that of Chu Qingning. When he saw such a delicate person, He blurted out, "Fairy." Su Li couldn't help but chuckle. "You flatter me. How can I bear such a special name?" Chu Qingning woke up with a start. Thinking of his own situation, he quickly calmed down. Su Huanli saw this short change, but he smiled more. If this person liked Su Li, even if Su Li could only be a concubine, it would also bring honor to her ancestors and family. She would become a phoenix. Su Li was slightly surprised. She slightly opened the nothing unusual. She thought that the liar would be ugly, but she didn't expect that he could calm down. At this time, Chu Qingning laughed loudly and said to Su Huanli, "Miss Su Li is really an outstanding beauty. She doesn't accept the good reputation. I have never seen such a beautiful girl as Miss Su in the capital city. I come here today to propose marriage. If you agree, I will send the first batch of betrothal gifts tomorrow. When I go back to the capital city to get married, I will send more gifts." Su Huanli was imagining that Su Li would become a member of the Wu family. He didn't expect that Chu Qingning proposed marriage so soon. He was shocked for a while. Chu Qingning was shocked, but he pretended to be unhappy. "What? Do you think that I don't deserve your daughter with my identity?" Su Huanli was shocked and quickly said, "Child Wu, you are exaggerating. I was just surprised for a moment and didn't respond. Child Wu, if Su Li marries into the Wu family, what is her identity?" Chu Qingning turned around and said affectionately, "Miss Su has a gentle temperament and is so beautiful. I will not mistreat her. Although she cannot be the principal wife, I will guarantee that her status will not be lower than that of the principal wife." Haydn snorted and muttered, "You are so lucky to marry my young master." In his heart, however, he was screaming wildly. Boss had earned big this time. Not only did he get a large sum of money, but he also cheated a fairy-like wife. He hated it. She nodded gently and laughed in her heart. She didn't expect that the two people really had a relationship. It seemed that she could kill less. Chu Qingning's eyes widened, and his body was stiff. He almost couldn't maintain the modesty of a noble child. Why did Fong Yuan work as a waiter in the Baiwei building? Fong Yuan's cultivation was much higher than his. Why did he have such a miserable life? Seeing Fong Yuan leave with the plate, Chu Qingning stared at him intently until he saw the latter made a gesture behind his back. Then he took back his gaze. Suddenly, Su Li, who was standing beside him, chuckled. "Look at you. Do you fancy the waiter of the Baiwei building? If you like it, I will give it to you." Su Li deliberately emphasized the word fancy. Chu Qingning's face immediately darkened. He didn't expect that his abnormality was misinterpreted by her. He was really not a Lord Rabbit. Haydn followed the two people and looked confused. Ever since the two of them came in, he couldn't understand a single word they said. After Su Li took Chu Qingning to walk around, she arranged Chu Qingning in the guest room and found an excuse to leave. Chu Qingning saw Su Li go to the kitchen and was relieved. After calculating the time, he quickly jumped out of the window with Haydn and disappeared in the dark alley. "Boss, what are we doing here?" Haydn saw that there was no one around and couldn't help but be afraid. "Aren't you brave? Why are you afraid of the dark?" Chu Qingning sneered and kept glancing around as if he was looking for something. Haydn blushed and was about to refute, but he saw a figure suddenly flashed in front of him. He was so scared that he wanted to scream, but his mouth was covered by the former. "Hush, keep your voice down. I'm not a bad person." Hearing the voice of the young man, Haydn was relieved and saw the latter's face clearly. Wasn't he the waiter who greeted Su Li just now? Chu Qingning looked at Fong Yuan, who looked calm. His eyes were complicated and seemed to be sad. He was silent for a moment and said in a low voice, "I didn't expect that you also escaped." Fong Yuan shook his head and said, "You are wrong. It's not me. It's me and my sister. I took her with me and escaped." Chu Qingning was surprised and said in a low voice, "Did Ling also escape?" Fong Yuan smiled and nodded gently. "That's great." Chu Qingning sighed. "You are still amazing. I almost didn't come out alive, but you can come here with a burden. But how did you become a waiter?" Chu Qingning felt strange. With Fong Yuan's means, he could live a good life by killing people casually. Fong Yuan shook his head and laughed. "I have a sister, but you don't. It seems that you live a good life. But you'd better be careful when you kill people. There are many martial arts practitioners in this town. Chu Qingning was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Haydn was more confused. Chapter 51. Fang Yuan looked at the pale face of his playmate from childhood. He shook his head and smiled. Qingning, how can I betray you? It's not what you think. But she? Chu Qingning watched Su Li coming slowly, and his face was full of doubts. To be exact, Su Li is my companion. So, I pretend to be a waiter in the restaurant. My sister is also taken care of by Su Li, Fang Yuan explained roughly and felt helpless. During this period, Fang Ling's food, accommodation, and medical expenses were all paid by Su Li. Fang Ling now completely regarded Su Li as her sister. Every time he argued with Su Li, his sister would stand on Su Li's side, which really pissed him off. Is that so? Chu Qingning was stunned. In his eyes, Su Li had always been the first miss of a merchant family who was ignorant of worldly affairs. Now it seemed that things were more complicated than he thought. How about it? Do you want to help me? Su Li smiled and said, I can give you the same or more than what Mrs. Zhu can give you. Chu Qingning's face darkened and he asked, I have a group of brothers in the ruined temple. Will you also help them? I don't keep idle people here. Su Li's first words made Chu Qingning feel cold, but the next words made him extremely shocked. However, even if they are sick or disabled, I will cure them and make them healthy. Then, I will teach them skills and help me to do things. What do you think? Speaking of this, Chu Qingning was slightly shocked. Mrs. Zhu could give him silver at most, but he had no way to teach them skills to be self-reliant. After all, if his identity as a deserter of Nanjiang country was exposed, he would be in trouble. How could he contact the officials of Dahan country? If Su Li was willing to help, it would be great. Miss Su is so straightforward. I will join you. Chu Qingning nodded without hesitation and then asked cautiously, Miss, have you long seen that I am not right? Su Li smiled meaningfully and said, I have seen the Wu Jin that you pretend to be. Chu Qingning's cold sweat suddenly flowed down. It turned out that he had been exposed from the beginning. Haydn listened to the conversation between the boss and Su Li and smiled embarrassedly. It was really embarrassing. Since you choose to help me, Fang Yuan, you take them to the valley and borrow some money to build more bamboo buildings. By the list I gave you as soon as possible. Su Li took out a banknote of 10,000 taels and handed it to Fang Yuan. Chu Qingning's eyes were shining. Su Li was so rich that she gave 10,000 taels without hesitation. Fang Yuan smiled bitterly and said, You really know how to order people around. I won't build a bamboo house this time. Qingning, you build your own residence. I was exhausted last time. Chu Qingning waved his hand and said, It's not a big deal. I have a lot of people under my command. It can be built in a few days. After that, Su Li left the dark alley. Although Su Li is just a weak woman, we can't compare with her in wisdom and stratagem. You can help her in the future. Don't think of any trick. Fang Yuan knew his partner's temperament, so he warned him. Chu Qingning gave a hollow laugh and glanced at the second floor of the bamboo house. He was extremely afraid. Early in the next morning, Su Huanli hurriedly got on the carriage. He even didn't have time to call Li Yin. He heard that someone sent a message that there was something wrong with the business of the cloth shop. He had to go and have a look. In the middle of the journey, Su Huanli suddenly felt something wrong. He opened the curtain. Before he saw the scenery outside, a black shadow suddenly came behind him and covered his mouth and nose with a handkerchief. Oh! Su Huanli subconsciously breathed twice. Suddenly, he turned his eyes and fainted. After a long time, Su Huanli woke up slowly. When he opened his eyes, he found that he was tied up and lying on the ground. Even his mouth was gagged. He couldn't make a sound. Who on earth tied me up? The Yang family? The Zhu family? Su Huanli was frightened and regretted that he didn't call Li Yin. If Li Yin was around, how could he be caught? When Su Huanli was struggling desperately, there was a sudden sound of footsteps outside. Su Huanli turned around with difficulty. Then he found that he was in a broken temple, and he was hidden behind the Buddha statue. He was about to make some noise to attract attention, but the sound outside made him stiff and completely calm. "Little bastard, I have given you the deposit. Why do you call me here?" Su Huanli's pupils shrank. He couldn't be more familiar with the voice. It was his wife, Zhu Yin. Ha 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 ha. There was a burst of laughter in the broken temple. Su Huanli recognized that it was the child Wu Jin, a relative of the emperor. How could they have an intersection? Why did the madam call him a little bastard? "First, madam, I call you here because I have something to ask." Chu Qingning's face was full of greed. He said, "I have inquired about it. Miss Su is an important figure in the Su family. She owns the Baiwei building. Her eldest brother is about to become a high-ranking official. I'm really a little scared to cheat such a woman." Although he said he was scared, Chu Qingning stretched out his right hand and rubbed it. It was obvious that he wanted to pay more. Zhu Yin was immediately angry and raised her eyebrows. She said, "Little bastard, don't be shameless. I have given you 1,000 taels of silver. Be careful not to choke to death." "Oh, first madam, I'm so scared." Chu Qingning looked careless and was not afraid at all. He said, "If I tell Lord Su about it and the whole town knows it, first madam, don't blame me for not keeping my promise." "First madam, you didn't make it clear. You made a mistake first." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.